You went back to her after I lost our baby?
You went back to her after I lost our baby. The words hit hard, sharp, shaking, barely holding together. Alina Vaughn stood frozen in the middle of the penthouse, her chest rising too fast, her fingers trembling at her sides like her body didn't know whether to fight or fall apart. Across from her, Callan Rhodes didn't move, didn't step closer, didn't deny it, and that was the first thing that broke her. Her breath caught, uneven, her lips parting as she shook her head slowly, like she was trying to wake herself up from something that didn't make sense. No, you don't get to stand there like that, she said, her voice cracking as she pointed at him. Say something. Silence. Thick, uncomfortable, final. Her eyes searched his face, desperate for something, anything. You didn't even wait, she whispered, softer now, but somehow more painful. I was still in that hospital trying to understand how we lost. She stopped. Her voice failed her. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Her hand moved to her stomach, instinctive, then dropped quickly like the memory burned. Callan, she tried again, her tone breaking this time. Just tell me I'm wrong. He exhaled slowly, dragging a hand over his jaw, his eyes flickering, but not away. And that hesitation? That was it. That was the moment everything collapsed. Alina let out a quiet, hollow laugh. Barely there. Wow. Okay, she nodded, more to herself now, pacing once like she needed space to process something her heart wasn't ready to accept. Then she stopped, turned back. Her voice dropped, colder. You got her pregnant, didn't you? A pause, short, heavy. Yes. Silence didn't follow, because silence would have been easier. Instead, everything inside her went still. No scream, no tears, just emptiness, like something had been ripped out of her before she even had time to react. You said you were working late, she murmured, her voice distant now, like she was replaying everything in her head in real time. You said you needed space. Her lips trembled slightly, but she held it together, barely, and all that time, her eyes lifted back to his. You were with her. Callan didn't answer, didn't correct her, didn't fix it, and somehow, that hurt more than the truth itself. Alina nodded slowly, swallowing hard as she took a step back, then another, creating space, not just physically, emotionally. Okay, she breathed out, her voice quieter now, steadier, but colder than before. So let me understand this. Her gaze dropped briefly, then returned to him, sharp. You lose our baby with me. A pause, and then, you go build another one with her? That landed hard. Even he felt it. But it didn't change anything. Her eyes closed for a second, just one, like she was holding something in, forcing herself not to break in front of him. When she opened them again, she was different, less emotional, more certain. Was she always there? She asked quietly. Or did you just run back to what was easy when things got hard with me? Callan's jaw tightened, and then the words came, low, honest, unforgiving. I never stopped loving her. That was it. That was the second break. The final one. Alina didn't speak, didn't react right away. She just stood there, staring at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. And somehow, that hurt more than everything else combined. Welcome back to Miss Wink's Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new here, you might want to sit with this one, because this isn't just a love story. It's about being the woman he chose, but never truly wanted. Before we go any further, go ahead and like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe. It might seem small, but it helps push stories like this out to more people. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends, because here's the real question. Have you ever loved someone who never fully chose you? Stayed, even when you felt it in your gut that something wasn't right? Fought for a relationship where you were giving everything, and they were holding something back? Well, Alina Vaughn thought she could make her marriage work, thought time would fix what love couldn't, thought patience would make him choose her. She was wrong, and what she's about to discover about that pregnancy, it doesn't just break her heart. It exposes a truth she was never supposed to find out. Stay with me. Alina Vaughn wasn't the kind of woman life handed things to. She built herself, piece by piece. Growing up on the south side of Atlanta, her world wasn't soft, but it was solid. Family meant something. Respect meant something. And love? Love wasn't just words. It was action. Her mother used to say, if someone loves you, you won't have to beg them to show it. Alina carried that with her. Through school, through friendships, through the early relationships that didn't quite work out, but taught her just enough to recognize what she would and wouldn't accept. She wasn't loud about her strength, didn't need to prove it. It showed in the way she carried herself. Steady, composed, like she knew exactly who she was, even when life tried to shake that, and life did, more than once. Her first real relationship had ended quietly, but it left a mark, not because it was dramatic, but because it was disappointing. He hadn't cheated, hadn't disrespected her openly. He just stopped choosing her. Less calls, less effort, less presence. Until one day, it felt like she was the only one holding on to something that was already gone. And that stayed with her, not as bitterness, but as awareness. Alina learned early that love doesn't disappear overnight. It fades, slowly. And if you're not paying attention, you'll find yourself fighting for something that no longer exists. So when she met Callan Rhodes, she didn't fall immediately, didn't lose herself, didn't rush. She observed, watched the way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he kept parts of himself just out of reach, because Callan wasn't easy to read. And Alina? She didn't trust what she couldn't understand. Still, something about him held her attention, not just the wealth, not just the presence. It was the control, the discipline, the way he walked into a room like everything was already handled. It was different from anything she'd known, and maybe that difference is what pulled her closer. But Alina never came into that relationship empty. She had her own standards, her own boundaries, her own sense of self. She didn't need Callan, and she made that clear, without ever saying it out loud. And yet, even strong women can choose the wrong man, not because they don't know better, but because they believe this one might be different. Loving Callan wasn't easy, not because he was cruel, not because he was careless, but because he was distant, emotionally, consistently, and Alina felt that early, in conversations that never quite went deep enough, in moments that almost turned intimate, but didn't, in the way he would look at her sometimes, like he was there, but not fully present. She noticed, of course she did, but she didn't call it out immediately, because part of her believed people open up in their own time. And when Callan did show something real, even if it was brief, it mattered. There were moments, late nights, where his voice softened just slightly, losing that edge he carried around everyone else. Small gestures, subtle but intentional, that showed he was paying attention in ways he didn't admit. Once, during a quiet evening, she had mentioned, just in passing, that she missed her mom's cooking. Nothing deep, just a thought. A few days later, Callan had a private chef recreate the exact meal, didn't announce it, didn't make it a big deal. He just made sure it was there. Alina noticed that, and that's the thing about women like her. They don't ignore effort, even the quiet kind. But effort isn't the same as presence, and deep down, she knew that. There were nights she lay beside him, awake, staring at the ceiling while his breathing stayed steady next to her. Close, but not connected. She would turn slightly, just enough to look at him, studying his face in the dim light, like she was trying to figure something out. "What are you thinking about?" she asked once, her voice soft, careful not to break the quiet too much. Callan didn't open his eyes. Work, simple, short, final. Alina nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay, but something about that answer didn't feel complete. She didn't push, didn't press for more, because she wasn't the kind of woman who forced conversations. If he wanted to open up, he would, at least, That's what she told herself. Still, that distance stayed subtle, persistent, like a space between them that never fully closed. And sometimes, when Callan thought she wasn't paying attention, she would catch it. That look in his eyes, not cold, not detached, but somewhere else. Like his mind had gone back to something or someone he hadn't let go of. Alina never asked, not then, because asking would mean acknowledging something she wasn't ready to face yet. So instead, she stayed, loved him in the way she knew how, patiently, fully, hoping that one day he would meet her there. But what she didn't realize at the time was that she had already stepped into a space that wasn't empty. And no matter how much she gave, she was never the first one who filled it. Callan Rhodes didn't grow up in a world where emotions were discussed. He grew up in a world where they were managed, controlled, contained. Raised between Boston and Manhattan, his life followed a structure most people never even see up close. Private schools, formal dinners, conversations that sounded more like negotiations than family bonding. Everything had a standard. Everything had an expectation. And Callan? He met all of them. His father believed in discipline over comfort, success over softness. Feelings don't build empires, he once told him at 17, standing in a quiet study lined with books that had probably never been read fully. Callan never forgot that. Not because it hurt, but because it made sense. At least, in the world he was raised in. By the time he was in his late 20s, Callan had already built a name for himself. Sharp, strategic, composed under pressure. A man who didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't get distracted by things that didn't serve a purpose. And relationships? They had a place too, but only if they fit, only if they aligned. That's how he approached everything, including love. To him, connection wasn't something you fell into, it was something you evaluated, measured, tested. Does this work? Does this make sense? Does this add value? If the answer was yes, you stayed. If not, you walked away. Simple. And for a long time, that worked for him. Because Callan didn't chase emotional highs, didn't crave intensity. He preferred stability, predictability, control. So when Alina entered his life, she didn't fit into that system easily. She wasn't calculated, wasn't distant, wasn't trying to prove anything. She was real, grounded in a way that didn't require validation. And that was unfamiliar. At first, he respected it. Then, he studied it. Because something about her didn't align with what he expected. She wasn't impressed by his world, didn't adjust herself to fit into it, didn't ask for more than what was real. But respect isn't the same as emotional connection. And Callan? He didn't fully understand that difference. So when he chose Alina, it wasn't because he was deeply in love, it was because she made sense. She was steady, strong, reliable, someone who wouldn't complicate his life. At least, that's what he thought. Callan didn't think he was doing anything wrong. That's the part people rarely understand. From his perspective, he was showing up, providing, maintaining consistency, being present in the ways he knew how. But love, real love, requires more than presence. It requires vulnerability. And that wasn't something Callan had ever learned to give. When Alina tried to connect on a deeper level, he noticed. Of course he did. He wasn't unaware. He just didn't know how to meet her there. One evening, she had asked him a simple question, nothing complicated. "Do you ever think about where we're going?" she said, her voice calm, her eyes searching his face. Not aggressively, just honestly. Callan glanced up from his laptop, his fingers pausing mid-motion. "We're married," he replied. "Isn't that the direction?" She held his gaze for a second longer. "That's not what I meant." A pause. He leaned back slightly, studying her like he was trying to understand what she was asking for. "What do you mean, then?" Alina hesitated briefly, then exhaled. "I mean, emotionally." That word sat there, uncomfortable, unfamiliar. Callan's expression didn't change much, but something in his posture shifted. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. "I think we're fine," he said. And to him, That answer made sense, but to Alina, it didn't. And that's where the gap lived. Not in what he did wrong, but in what he didn't understand. Callan wasn't cold, he just wasn't open. There's a difference. He didn't ignore Alina's needs. He just didn't fully grasp them, didn't recognize the weight behind the things she wasn't saying, didn't see that love for her wasn't about structure. It was about feeling seen, chosen, fully. And because he didn't understand that, he never realized when he was falling short. There were moments, small ones, where something almost broke through, where he felt something deeper, stronger, but instead of leaning into it, he pulled back, instinctively, like he didn't trust it. Because vulnerability, to Callan, felt like losing control, and control was the one thing he never let go of. So even as Alina moved closer emotionally, Callan stayed where he was, consistent, present, but never fully. There, and without realizing it, he created a space in his marriage, a quiet distance, one that didn't feel urgent at first, but over time became impossible to ignore, because love can't grow fully where something is always being held back. Serena Hale was never a question in Callan's world. She was an expectation, the kind of woman people assumed he would end up with, before he even said a word about it. They met the way people like them always do, at an event, introduced through familiar names, connections that already overlapped before they even spoke, and from the outside, they made sense immediately. Serena moved through those spaces effortlessly. Old money, refined presence, the kind of confidence that didn't need attention, but always held it. She understood the language of that world, the pauses in conversations, the unspoken rules, the way people said things without actually saying them. Callan didn't have to explain anything to her. She already knew. Their relationship wasn't chaotic, wasn't unpredictable. It was aligned. Two people who fit. Two people who moved at the same pace. Two people who understood each other without needing to go too deep. And for Callan, that mattered. Because with Serena, everything stayed within his comfort zone. There were no emotional demands he couldn't manage. No expectations that forced him to open parts of himself he kept guarded. It was easy, structured, controlled, but that was also the problem. Because, while everything worked on the surface, something underneath it didn't, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly incomplete. Serena noticed it first. Of course she did. She was perceptive, like that. One evening, sitting across from him at a private dinner, she studied him for a moment longer than usual, her glass resting untouched in her hand. "You're here," she said calmly, tilting her head slightly, "but you're not really here." Callan looked up, his expression neutral. "I'm listening." She gave a small, knowing smile. "That's not what I meant." A pause. Serena didn't push, didn't argue, didn't demand more, because she understood something about Callan early. If you forced him emotionally, he pulled back. So instead, she adjusted, maintained the structure, kept things smooth, and eventually, that distance between them didn't close. It just became accepted. Their relationship didn't end with a dramatic fight, didn't collapse under pressure. It simply reached a point where continuing it didn't make sense anymore. Callan walked away, calmly, logically, like he did everything else. And Serena? She let him, not because she didn't care, but because she understood. You can't hold on to someone who isn't fully there. Still, some connections don't disappear. They pause, they settle, they wait. And Serena? She was never completely gone. Alina didn't meet Serena right away, but she felt her before she ever saw her. It wasn't something anyone said directly. No one needed to. It lived in the spaces between conversations, in the way certain people would pause when Alina's name came up, just a second too long, in the subtle shifts at events when someone mentioned Callan's past. They were together for years, someone once said quietly. Not realizing Alina was close enough to hear, another voice followed. Honestly, everyone thought they'd get married. Alina didn't react. didn't interrupt, didn't make it known she had heard. She just kept walking, like it didn't matter. But it did, because from that moment, a question settled in her mind, one she didn't ask, but never fully let go of. Why didn't he choose her? And deeper than that, if he didn't choose someone who fit him that perfectly, then what did that make me? Alina tried to shake it off, tried to focus on what she had in front of her, her marriage, her reality, the life she was building. But certain things, they stay quietly in the background. She started noticing it more after that, not in obvious ways, but in moments, the way Callan would go still, just briefly, when Serena's name came up in passing. The way conversations around that topic ended quickly, too quickly, and once, just once, Alina saw her. It was at a formal event, nothing out of the ordinary. Music, conversations, polished smiles. Alina stood beside Callan, composed as always, her presence calm, grounded. Then, a shift, subtle, but immediate. Callan's posture changed, not dramatically, just enough. Alina followed his line of sight, and there she was, Serena, standing across the room, completely at ease, like she belonged exactly where she was. Because she did. Their eyes met, not Alina's and Serena's, Callan's and Serena's, and in that moment, something passed between them, not spoken, not obvious to anyone else, but real. Alina saw it, felt it, understood it. Her chest tightened just slightly, but her expression didn't change. She didn't look away immediately, didn't react. She just observed. Then slowly, she turned back forward, like it didn't affect her. But later that night, standing alone for a moment, adjusting her bracelet, she paused. Her fingers stilled. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror. Calm, composed, unshaken. She breathed out softly. And for the first time, the thought fully formed, clear, unavoidable. She wasn't the woman he had always wanted. She was the woman he ended up with. And still, she stayed, because at that point, she believed something dangerous. That love could make someone choose you, even if they didn't at first. Marriage didn't change them overnight. It didn't suddenly make things deeper, or easier, or clearer. If anything, it made everything more visible. Alina adjusted into it first, not by forcing anything, but by observing, learning his rhythms, understanding his patterns, recognizing when to step forward and when to step back. Because Callan's world ran on structure, and she knew better than to disrupt something she didn't fully understand yet. Mornings were quiet, predictable. Callan at the kitchen island, already dressed, scrolling through something on his tablet, coffee untouched for longer than it should have been. Alina moved around the space naturally, her presence steady, unforced. "Are you eating anything?" she asked one morning, opening the fridge. Callan didn't look up immediately. "I'll grab something later." She paused, closed the fridge slowly. "You said that yesterday." That made him glance up, just briefly. "I wasn't hungry." Alina held his gaze for a second, not challenging, just noting. She didn't push, didn't argue. She just placed a plate in front of him anyway. Callan looked at it, then at her. Something unspoken passed between them. He didn't thank her, didn't question it, but he ate. Small things like that started building something between them, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but present. Evenings were different, less structured, more open, but still careful. One night, Alina sat on the couch, her legs tucked slightly under her, a book resting in her lap that she hadn't turned the page of in a while. Callan walked in, loosening his tie as usual, his attention shifting toward her almost automatically. "You're reading?" he asked. She glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. Trying to... A pause. He stepped closer. "What does that mean?" Alina tilted her head slightly. "It means I've been on the same page for 10 minutes. That caught his attention, more than the book. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a second, then shrugged lightly. "My mind's just busy." Callan studied her longer this time, like he was deciding whether to ask more. He didn't walk away either. Instead, he sat, not too close, but not distant, just near, and that space between them, it felt different, not empty, not tense, just waiting. Alina became aware of it immediately, of him, of how close he actually was, of the subtle shift in the air that came whenever he stayed longer than expected. She turned a page, didn't read it. Callan leaned back slightly, his arm resting along the back of the couch, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the presence of it. Neither of them spoke, but something was building, slowly, quietly, and neither of them addressed it. It started with looks, not intentional, not planned, just moments that lasted longer than they should have. Alina noticed it first, because she paid attention. One afternoon she stood at the kitchen counter, slicing fruit, her focus steady, her movements precise. Callan walked in mid-call, his tone low, controlled, his attention divided between the conversation and whatever he had been working on before. He stopped near the counter, still speaking, still focused. Then he paused, not because the conversation ended, but because something shifted. His eyes lifted and landed on her. Alina felt it immediately, that awareness, that subtle pull that made her glance up without thinking. Their eyes met, just for a second. No, longer, long enough for something to register, something unspoken. Callan's voice faded slightly on the phone, his words becoming slower, less precise. Not enough for the other person to notice, but enough for her to see. Alina didn't look away right away, didn't break it. And that was new, because usually she would. "I'll call you back," Callan said suddenly, ending the conversation without waiting for a response. The silence that followed, it felt different. "Everything okay?" Alina asked, her tone calm, but softer now. Callan didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, closer this time, more focused. "Yeah," he said finally. But his voice, it didn't sound distracted anymore. Alina swallowed lightly, turning her attention back to the counter, but her movements had slowed. She could feel it, that shift. Callan stepped forward, just slightly, not enough to invade her space, but enough to change it. "Let me see that," he said, gesturing toward the knife in her hand. She handed it to him without thinking. Their fingers brushed, and that contact, it lingered, just a second longer than necessary. Alina felt it, sharp, unexpected, her breath caught, but only slightly, barely noticeable. Callan noticed. Of course he did. He didn't pull back immediately, didn't react, but something in his expression changed, subtle, controlled, but there. "You cut these uneven," he said, his tone shifting back to neutral. But it didn't quite land the same way. Alina glanced at the fruit, then back at him. A faint, almost amused look touched her face. "Then fix it." A pause. Callan held her gaze, then nodded once, but he didn't move right away. And that space between them? It wasn't accidental anymore. It was intentional, because both of them felt it now. That quiet tension, that pull, that awareness of each other that went beyond conversation, beyond routine. And neither of them said a word about it, because saying it would make it real. And once it became real, it wouldn't be so easy to ignore. What made it harder wasn't what they felt, it was what they didn't say. Because by now, the tension between them wasn't accidental anymore. It had weight, presence, a quiet awareness that followed them into every shared space. But neither of them addressed it. Alina, because she had learned not to chase what wasn't freely given. Callan, because acknowledging it would mean stepping into something he didn't fully understand. So instead, they kept things controlled. One evening, they sat across from each other at the dining table, plates half finished, the conversation light, surface level. "How was your day?" Alina asked, her tone calm, measured. "Busy," Callan replied, taking a sip of water. "A few meetings ran longer than expected." She nodded. "Anything important?" "Nothing unexpected." A pause. Alina leaned back slightly, studying him, not intensely, just enough to notice. You always say that. Callan glanced up. Say what? That nothing is unexpected. Another pause, short, but heavier. Callan set his glass down carefully. I don't like surprises. Alina held his gaze for a second longer than usual. Yeah, she said quietly. I noticed. The air shifted, not dramatically, but enough, because underneath that simple exchange, there was something else, something neither of them said out loud. Alina's fingers traced lightly against the edge of the table, her thoughts moving slower now. Do you ever just let things happen? She asked, her voice softer this time, almost careful. Callan didn't answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction, not in irritation, but in thought. What do you mean? She hesitated, then shrugged lightly, like, without trying to control the outcome. That word sat there. Control. Callan exhaled through his nose, his gaze shifting briefly away before returning to her. I prefer knowing where things are going. Alina nodded. Of course he did, but something about that answer didn't sit right. Even with people? She asked. Another pause. Callan looked at her again, longer this time, more directly, especially with people. That should have been enough. A clear answer. A complete one. But Alina felt something in it. Something that didn't fully connect. She leaned back slightly, her lips pressing together for a brief moment before she spoke again. And if you can't? She asked. Callan's gaze held hers, steady, unmoving. Then I don't stay where I don't understand what I'm dealing with. Silence. That landed, not loudly, but deeply. Alina nodded slowly, her eyes dropping to her plate for just a second before lifting again. And just like that, the conversation ended, not because it was finished, but because it had reached a point neither of them was ready to push past. Because if they did, they might have to say things they couldn't take back. It didn't take much after that. Just space and time. The tension they had been holding back started showing up in smaller, more physical ways. One night, the power went out, unexpected. The entire penthouse dimmed into silence, the soft hum of electricity disappearing in an instant. Alina stood in the hallway, her hand brushing lightly along the wall as she adjusted to the darkness. Callan, she called out. I'm here. His voice came from the living room, calm, but closer than she expected. She moved toward the sound, slowly, carefully, and then she stopped because he was right there, closer than she realized, too close to step forward, too close to ignore. For a second, neither of them moved. Alina's breath slowed slightly, her body becoming aware of everything all at once, the space between them, the warmth coming from him, the quiet that suddenly felt heavier. Did you check the breaker? She asked, her voice softer now. Not intentionally, just naturally shifting. Callan didn't answer right away. Not yet. A pause. Alina nodded faintly, even though he probably couldn't see it clearly. Okay. But neither of them moved, because stepping away would break it, and stepping closer would change it. Callan's hand lifted slightly, hesitated, then rested lightly against her arm. Not firm, not demanding, just there. Alina felt it instantly. That contact, warm, steady, her breath caught. Just for a second. Neither of them spoke. The darkness made everything sharper, closer, more real. Callan's thumb shifted slightly against her skin, barely, but enough, and that was the moment, the exact moment, where something could have crossed the line, but it didn't, because just as quickly, he pulled back. The contact gone, the space returning. I'll check the breaker, he said, his tone returning to neutral. Alina stood there for a second longer, her arm still holding the memory of where his hand had been. Okay, she replied quietly. Footsteps, distance, and just like that, the moment ended. But it didn't disappear, because now, they both knew, this wasn't just tension anymore. It was something building, something neither of them had fully allowed before, and the more they ignored it, the stronger it became. It happened on a night that didn't feel important at first. No event, no occasion, just quiet. Alina sat on the floor of the living room, her back resting lightly against the couch, a glass of wine untouched beside her. The city lights stretched beyond the windows, soft and distant, but she wasn't looking at them. Her mind had been full lately, too full. She didn't hear Callan come in. Not at first. "You're sitting on the floor?" His voice cut through gently, not sharp, not distracted, just present. Alina glanced over her shoulder slightly, then back ahead. "Yeah." A small pause. "I needed space." Callan stood there for a second, watching her, taking in the posture, the stillness, the quiet. Then slowly, he moved closer, not to the couch, not away, but down. He sat on the floor beside her. That alone, that was new. Alina noticed immediately. Her fingers stilled slightly against the glass, her body becoming aware of the shift without her trying to. "You could have used the bedroom," he said, his tone low, almost thoughtful. She shook her head faintly. "No, I didn't want walls." A pause. Callan leaned back slightly, his arm resting behind him for support, his gaze drifting toward the windows for a moment before returning to her. "Something on your mind?" he asked. Alina let out a small breath. Not heavy, not dramatic, just honest. "A lot of things." He waited, didn't interrupt, didn't redirect. That alone made her glance at him, because usually he would. "Like what?" he asked after a moment, his voice quieter now. She hesitated, just slightly. "Us," she said. That word landed between them. Not loud, but heavy. Callan didn't react immediately, but something in his posture shifted. Barely noticeable, but there. Alina looked down at her hands, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the glass. "I don't always know where I stand with you," she admitted. There it was, clear, unfiltered. Callan exhaled slowly, his gaze settling on her more directly now. "What makes you say that?" Alina let out a faint, almost humorless breath. "You really don't see it." A pause. He didn't answer. She nodded once, like that silence confirmed more than words could. Okay." She set the glass aside, her hands now free, her posture shifting slightly as she turned more toward him. "I'm not asking for anything complicated," she continued, her voice steady, but softer now. I need to feel like I matter to you. Not just on paper. Not just because we're married." Callan's jaw tightened slightly, not defensive, just processing. "You do matter," he said. Alina held his gaze, longer this time. "That's not the same as feeling it," she replied. Silence. Real silence. Because that wasn't something he could answer quickly. Callan leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees now, his hands loosely clasped together. "What does that look like for you?" he asked. That question, that was different. Alina blinked once, caught off guard. Not by the question itself, but by the fact that he asked it. She took a breath. "It looks like you being here," she said. "Not halfway, not distracted, just here." Another pause. Callan's gaze stayed on her, focused, intent, and for the first time, he didn't look like he was trying to analyze the situation. He looked like he was actually listening, really listening. Alina felt it, that shift, that small but important change in his presence. Her breath slowed slightly. "And I don't know if you can give me that," she added quietly. That was the moment, the one where everything could go either way. Callan's eyes didn't leave hers, not this time. "I can try," he said. Simple, not perfect, but real. Alina's expression softened, just slightly, not fully, but enough. "Okay," she replied. A pause, and then something changed. Not in the words, but in the space between them. Because now, they were closer, not physically at first, but emotionally. Callan shifted slightly, turning more toward her, his knee brushing lightly against hers. Alina felt it instantly. That contact, subtle, but intentional. Neither of them moved away. Her breath caught, just slightly. Callan noticed. Of course he did. His hand lifted slowly, carefully, like he was giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. She didn't. His fingers brushed lightly against her arm, gentle, measured. Alina's body responded before her thoughts could catch up, her shoulders tightening slightly, her breath deepening. As that awareness settled in, they didn't speak. Didn't need to, because everything they weren't saying was right there, between them. Callan's hand moved just slightly, barely, tracing along her arm in a way that wasn't rushed, wasn't demanding, just present. Alina's eyes lifted to his, slowly, and that look, that was different from before, less guarded, more open. For a moment, it felt like everything had aligned, like they had finally reached the same place at the same time. Callan leaned in slightly, not enough to close the distance completely, just enough to make the intention clear. Alina didn't pull back, didn't move. Her breath slowed, then deepened, and for a second, everything else faded. This, right here, this was what she had been waiting for. But just as quickly, Callan stopped. His hand stilled, his movement paused. Something shifted in his expression, not doubt, not confusion, just hesitation. And that hesitation, that was enough. Alina saw it, felt it, understood it. Her body pulled back slightly before she could stop herself. Not dramatically, just enough. Callan noticed. Of course he did. His hand dropped slowly, the contact breaking. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice returning to something more controlled. There it was, that distance, back again. Alina nodded once, not trusting herself to say more. She stood, carefully, and walked away, because she had just seen something clearly. Even when he tried, even when he got close, he still couldn't fully cross that line, and that would cost them more than either of them realized. It started quietly, not as a problem, not as something urgent, just a question that lingered longer than it should have. "How long have you been trying?" The doctor's tone was calm, professional, practiced. Alina sat upright in the chair, her hands resting together in her lap, fingers interlocked tighter than necessary. Callan sat beside her, composed as always, his posture straight, his expression neutral. Alina glanced at him briefly, then back at the doctor. "A few months," she answered. The doctor nodded, making a note. "That's still within a normal range. But we can run some tests just to be sure everything is progressing as expected." Progressing. The words stayed with her. "Just routine," the doctor added with a small smile. Alina nodded. "Okay, simple, easy, manageable. At least, that's how it sounded." The first appointment didn't feel heavy. Not yet. It felt like information, like something proactive. But the second one felt different. The room was the same, the tone was the same, but the energy, it shifted. "Some of the results came back," the doctor said, flipping through the file. Alina sat still, her eyes fixed on the edge of the desk, her breathing steady, but shallow. "Nothing alarming," the doctor continued. "A small pause, but we may need to monitor a few things more closely." Monitor. Another word that didn't feel as light as it sounded. Callan leaned slightly forward. "What does that mean?" The doctor kept her tone even. "It just means we'll take a more detailed approach moving forward. Sometimes these things take time." Time. Alina nodded again, but this time, it didn't feel reassuring, because something about the way it was said felt like the beginning of something she wasn't ready for. The car ride home was quiet, not tense, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Callan drove, his focus straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Alina sat beside him, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her thoughts moving slowly. "It's probably nothing," she said finally, her voice soft, almost like she was convincing herself. Callan glanced at her briefly. Yeah, that was it. No deep reassurance, no follow-up, just agreement. And somehow, that made the silence heavier. Alina turned slightly toward the window, watching the city pass by in a blur, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She studied it. Calm face, controlled expression, no sign of what was building underneath. "I'll be fine," she murmured under her breath. But the words didn't settle the way she hoped they would, because something had already shifted. And even though no one said it out loud, the question had been planted. What if it's not nothing? If you've ever been in a situation where everything seemed fine on the surface, but deep down, you felt something wasn't right, go ahead and drop a comment. I want to hear your thoughts. Because this part of the story, it gets real. The waiting became the hardest part. Not the appointments, not the conversations, just the time in between. Alina stopped expecting quick answers, stopped looking for immediate results. But she didn't stop hoping. Every month, there was a moment, a quiet one, where everything paused. She would stand in the bathroom, staring at the test in her hand, her breath steady, her expression unreadable. Not anxious, not excited, just still. "Okay," she whispered once, her voice barely there. Then she looked negative. Her face didn't change immediately, didn't react the way people might expect. She just stood there. For a second, maybe two, then slowly, she placed it down and moved on, like it didn't matter. But it did. It showed up in small ways. The way she lingered longer in the bathroom after, the way her shoulders dropped just slightly when she thought no one was watching, the way her energy shifted, subtle but consistent. Callan noticed. Of course he did, but he didn't say much. One evening, he stood near the doorway, watching her quietly as she folded laundry on the bed. Her movements were steady, controlled, but slower than usual. "You okay?" he asked. Alina didn't look up immediately. "Yeah," she replied. A pause. Then she added, "Just tired." Callan nodded once. "Get some rest." That was it. He didn't step closer, didn't ask more. And Alina? She didn't expect him to, because by now, she understood something about him. He didn't step into things he couldn't fix. And this wasn't something he could solve with logic. So instead, he stayed at a distance, and she carried it alone. Late at night, when everything was quiet, Alina would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts louder than the silence around her. She didn't cry, not often, but she felt it, that quiet disappointment that didn't explode, just settled. "Maybe next time," she whispered once, turning slightly onto her side. But even that hope started to feel fragile, because the more it didn't happen, the harder it became to believe it would, and slowly, without realizing it, Alina began preparing herself for something she didn't want to accept, that this might not come easy, or worse, it might not come at all. At some point, it stopped feeling like a shared journey, and started feeling like something Alina carried alone. Not because Callan said it was her fault. He didn't, not once, but it was in what he didn't say, didn't ask, didn't reach for. The appointments continued. More tests, more conversations, more careful explanations wrapped in calm, professional tones. "Everything looks stable," the doctor said during one visit. Her voice measured, "but we're not seeing the kind of progression we'd expect yet." Alina nodded. Of course she did. She had learned how to receive those kinds of statements, without reacting. Callan sat beside her, his attention fixed on the doctor, asking the necessary questions. What are the next steps? What are the options? How long before we reassess? Logical, structured, efficient. Alina listened, but something about the conversation didn't include her, not really, because while they were discussing timelines and possibilities, she was sitting there, feeling it, not in numbers, not in reports, but in her body. The quiet awareness that something wasn't working the way it should. The ride home felt familiar now, too familiar. Callan spoke first this time. "We'll just follow the plan," he said, his tone steady. "There are solutions for this." Solutions. Alina turned slightly toward the window, her fingers resting lightly against the door handle. "Yeah," she replied, but her voice didn't carry the same certainty, because to her, this didn't feel like something that could just be solved. That night she stood alone in the bathroom again, the mirror reflecting back the same composed version of herself everyone else saw, but her eyes, They lingered longer. She studied her reflection carefully, like she was searching for something. "What's wrong with me?" she asked quietly. The question slipped out before she could stop it, and once it was there, it stayed. Alina straightened slightly, her jaw tightening just enough to hold herself together. She shook her head once, almost dismissing the thought. "Nothing," she corrected under her breath. But it didn't feel true, because even without anyone saying it, she felt it. That shift, the one that turns a situation into something personal. It didn't happen all at once. That thought, it built slowly, quietly, through every appointment, every result, every moment that didn't go the way she hoped, until one night, it finally surfaced. Alina sat at the edge of the bed, her hands resting against her thighs, her shoulders slightly slumped, not from exhaustion but from something heavier. Callan stood across the room, adjusting his watch, preparing for another late evening out. "I'll be back later," he said. Alina didn't respond immediately. "You've been out a lot," she said after a moment, her voice calm, but thinner than usual. Callan glanced at her briefly. "Work?" A pause. She nodded once, then looked up. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. Callan's brows pulled together slightly. "Think about what?" Alina hesitated. "Just for a second." "This," she said, gesturing vaguely between them. "Us. Trying." Callan exhaled lightly, like he was shifting into explanation mode. "We're already addressing it." "The doctor, that's not what I meant." Her voice cut in, not sharp but firm enough to stop him. A pause. Alina swallowed, her gaze dropping briefly before lifting again. "I mean, does it bother you?" she asked. Callan looked at her. Really looked this time. "It's something we're working on," he said. Careful, measured. Alina nodded slowly, but something in her expression changed, because that wasn't an answer. "Okay," she murmured. She looked away, and that's when it slipped out. Not planned, not controlled. "I just feel like I'm failing you." Silence. Callan stilled. "What?" he said, his tone shifting, more alert now. Alina shook her head slightly, her hands tightening against her thighs. "I know you didn't say it," she added quickly. "I'm not saying you did. I just—" She stopped, took a breath. "I just feel like I'm not enough," she finished, her voice quieter now. There it was, the truth she hadn't wanted to say. Callan stepped forward slightly, his expression tightening. Not in anger, but in something else. "You're not failing anything," he said. Alina gave a faint nod, but she didn't look convinced, because reassurance doesn't always reach where the damage already exists. "Okay," she said again, but this time it sounded different, less like agreement, more like acceptance. And that was more dangerous, because in that moment, Alina didn't just feel disappointed. She felt replaceable, and once that thought settles in, it changes everything. By the time it settled in, Alina stopped talking about it, not because it didn't matter anymore, but because saying it out loud made it feel heavier. So instead, she adjusted, quietly. The doctor visits became routine, predictable, less emotional on the surface. She nodded when needed, listened when spoken to, followed instructions without hesitation. But something about her had changed. She no longer walked into those rooms expecting good news, just information. One afternoon, she sat across from the doctor again, her posture straight, her expression composed in that same controlled way she had perfected over time. "We can explore other options if needed," the doctor said gently. "There are still paths forward." "Paths forward," Alina nodded. "Okay," but her voice didn't carry hope this time, because in her mind, this wasn't about options anymore. It was about acceptance. The drive home felt quieter than usual. Even the city outside seemed distant, muted. Callan drove as he always did, focused, steady, saying just enough to fill the space, but not enough to reach it. "We'll figure it out," he said again. The same words, the same tone. Alina turned slightly toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "Yeah," she replied. But this time, she didn't believe it. Because something inside her had already started letting go. Not of the marriage, not of him, but of the expectation that it would happen, that she would be able to give him what he deserved. And that thought, it sat quietly in her chest, heavy, unmoving. That evening, the penthouse felt larger than usual. Too much space, too much silence. Alina moved through it slowly, her steps measured, her mind distant. She paused in the hallway, then turned. The guest room. She hadn't been in there in a while. Not since. She stopped herself. Didn't finish the thought. Instead, she stepped inside. The room was untouched, clean, still. She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning the space like she was imagining something that wasn't there. A crib, soft blankets, life. Her chest tightened slightly. "It's fine," she whispered, but her voice didn't hold. She walked further in, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the dresser, grounding herself in something real. Then she stopped, because for the first time, she allowed the thought to fully form. What if this never happens? The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. Alina exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just slightly as she looked around again, this time not imagining anything, just seeing it for what it was, empty. She nodded once, slow. "Okay," she said under her breath. And that word, it didn't mean she was fine. It meant she was accepting something she didn't want. That night, she didn't bring it up again, didn't mention it to Callan, didn't ask questions. She lay beside him in silence, her back turned slightly, her eyes open long after his breathing had evened out. And in that quiet, she made a decision, not dramatic, not spoken, just understood. She would stop hoping so loudly, because hope had started to hurt more than the disappointment. But life doesn't always follow the decisions we make in our lowest moments, because sometimes, right when you've convinced yourself to let go, something unexpected finds you and changes everything. It didn't feel different at first. That was the strange part. Alina woke up that morning the same way she had for weeks, quiet, composed, not expecting anything new. She moved through her routine without thinking. Bathroom, sink, mirror. Her reflection looked back at her the same way it always did. Calm, controlled, guarded, but something in her body felt off, not painful, not alarming, just unfamiliar. She frowned slightly, resting her hand against the counter as she tried to place it. "Maybe I didn't sleep well," she murmured, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed, subtle, persistent, and for a moment, just a moment, a thought crossed her mind. She almost ignored it. Almost, but something stopped her. Her hand moved slowly toward the drawer, opened it. The test was still there. She stared at it for a second longer than necessary. "Don't," she whispered to herself, because she had done this before, more than once, and every time, the result had been the same, disappointment. But still, her fingers closed around it. She didn't rush, didn't move quickly. Everything about this moment felt careful, like she was protecting herself from something she hadn't even confirmed yet. Minutes later, she stood there again, in the same place, the test in her hand. Her eyes didn't move right away. She just stood there, breathing, waiting. "Okay," she said quietly. Then, she looked, and everything stopped. Her breath caught mid-inhale, her fingers tightening slightly around the test as her eyes scanned it again, just to be sure. 2 lines. Clear, undeniable. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slightly, not in denial, but in disbelief. "Wait." She looked again, closer, still there. Real. A small broken laugh slipped out of her before she could stop it, her free hand coming up to cover her mouth as her knees bent just slightly. "Oh my God." Her back pressed lightly against the counter, her chest rising and falling unevenly now, her eyes filling before she could hold it back. "It's real," she whispered. It actually, she couldn't finish, didn't need to, because in that moment, everything she had been holding back came rushing forward. Relief, shock, hope she didn't trust yet, but felt anyway. Her hand moved slowly to her stomach, resting there instinctively, like she was grounding herself in something she couldn't even see yet. And for the first time in a long time, Alina allowed herself to feel it. Not cautiously, not halfway, fully. Callan was in his office when she found him. The door was slightly open. He stood near his desk, focused on something on his screen, his posture straight, his attention fixed. Alina paused at the doorway, just for a second. Her heart was beating faster now. Not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in a while. Anticipation. "Callan," she said. Something in her voice made him stop. He turned, and for a moment, he didn't speak, because something about her expression was different. "What is it?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly, more attentive now. Alina stepped forward. Slowly, she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she reached for his hand. Callan frowned slightly, glancing down as she placed something into it. The test, his eyes settled on it. 1 second, 2, then, his expression changed, not dramatically, not instantly, but noticeably. "Is this?" he started, his voice lower now. Alina nodded, her lips trembling just slightly. "Yes." Silence, but not the kind they were used to. This one felt full. Callan's grip on the test tightened just a fraction, his gaze still locked on it like he was making sure it wouldn't disappear. Then, slowly, he looked up at her, and something shifted, subtle, but real. "You're sure?" he asked. Alina let out a small breath. "I checked twice." Then, Callan stepped closer, not out of obligation, not out of habit, but intentionally. His hand came up, resting lightly at her waist, and this time, he didn't hesitate. Alina felt it immediately, that difference, because, before, there was always a pause, a distance, a restraint, but now, it wasn't there. "We're having a baby," he said quietly, and the way he said it, it sounded real, like he believed it, like he wanted it. Alina swallowed softly, her hand lifting to rest over his. Yes, another pause, but this one felt like something beginning, because for the first time, Callan didn't look distant. He looked present, and that changed everything. The change didn't happen all at once, but it was there, in the way Callan stayed longer, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Mornings felt different now. Alina stood in the kitchen one day, pouring a glass of water, her movements slow, careful, but lighter than before. Callan walked in, already dressed, his usual routine intact. But something about him had shifted. "You ate?" he asked. Alina paused slightly, glancing over her shoulder. A small smile touched her lips. "Not yet." Callan nodded once, moving past her, not toward the door like usual, but toward the counter. "Sit," he said. That made her blink. "What?" He glanced at her briefly. "I'll handle it." A pause. Alina studied him for a second, like she was making sure this was real. Then, slowly, she sat. Callan moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, pulling things together in a way that wasn't rushed, but intentional. She watched him, not openly, but enough. "You don't have to do that," she said after a moment. Callan didn't look up. "I know." That answer, simple, but different, because it wasn't about obligation, it was about presence. Alina felt it. That shift, that quiet change in the way he showed up. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like she was reaching alone. Evenings changed too. Less distance. More awareness. One night, they stood on the balcony. The city stretched out beneath them, the air calm, still. Alina leaned lightly against the railing, her hand resting over her stomach without thinking. Callan stood beside her, closer than before, not touching, but near enough that she could feel him there. "Are you okay?" he asked. Alina glanced at him. "Yeah." A small pause. Then she added, "I think I am." Callan nodded, slowly. He didn't say much, didn't need to, because this time, he stayed And that alone meant more than anything he could have said. It started showing in the quiet moments, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just closer. One night, Alina stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her shirt, her reflection softer now, less guarded. Callan leaned against the doorframe behind her, his arms relaxed at his sides as he watched her. "You've been smiling more," he said. Alina caught his reflection in the mirror. "Have I?" He nodded once. A pause, then he stepped forward, closer. This time, he didn't stop halfway. His hands rested gently at her waist. Steady, grounding. Alina's breath shifted slightly, her body becoming aware of the contact instantly. She didn't move, didn't pull away, because this was what she had been waiting for. Not just touch, but intention. Callan's gaze stayed on her through the mirror, his expression quieter now, less guarded. "You should rest more," he said softly. Alina let out a faint breath, her hands settling over his. "I will." A pause, and then he turned her slightly, not rushed, not forceful, just enough to face him. Their eyes met. Closer now, no distance, no hesitation. Callan's hand lifted, brushing lightly along her cheek, his touch slower than it had ever been before. Alina's breath caught, just slightly, and this time, he didn't pull back. He leaned in, not all the way, just enough to close the space between them, and she let him, because in that moment, it felt real, like everything had finally aligned, like all the distance, all the uncertainty, all the waiting, had led to this. Callan's forehead rested lightly against hers, his hand still steady at her waist. "We're okay," he murmured. Alina closed her eyes briefly, letting that settle, letting herself believe it. "Yeah," she whispered. But what neither of them realized was that this wasn't resolution, it was relief. And relief doesn't last for a while. It felt stable, not perfect, not guaranteed, but steady enough for Alina to breathe without fear sitting in her chest. She moved carefully now, not out of anxiety, but out of awareness. Every step mattered. Every movement carried meaning. That morning felt no different. Alina stood in the kitchen, one hand resting lightly against the counter, as she reached for a glass of water. The sunlight filtered in softly, everything calm, almost peaceful. Then, a sharp pull, her body froze instantly. "Okay," she whispered under her breath, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the counter. It wasn't unbearable, not yet, just sudden, unexpected. She stayed still for a moment, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. Instead, it came again, stronger. Her breath caught, her free hand moving instinctively to her stomach, as her body reacted before her thoughts could catch up. "Callan," she called out, her voice tighter now. Footsteps. "Quick, what is it?" he asked, already moving toward her. Alina tried to straighten, tried to steady herself, but her face betrayed everything. I think something's wrong." The words landed heavy between them. Callan's expression changed immediately. No hesitation, no distance. "What do you feel?" he asked, his voice sharper now, more focused. Alina shook her head slightly, her breathing uneven. "I don't know. It just... pain." This time, it hit harder. Her body folded slightly, her hand gripping the counter as a small sound escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Alina, it hurts," she managed, her voice breaking now. That was enough. Callan didn't ask anything else. "Get your shoes," he said quickly. "We're going." But Alina didn't move right away, because something deeper, something instinctive, was already telling her what she didn't want to believe. "No," she whispered, shaking her head faintly. Callan stepped closer, his hands steadying her. "Hey, look at me. We're going to the hospital. Now." His voice was firm, grounded, but for the first time, Alina didn't feel reassured, because her body already knew. If you've ever had a moment where something felt wrong before anyone could even explain it, drop a comment. I want to know. Did you trust that feeling, or did you try to ignore it? The drive felt endless, Too fast. Too slow. Alina sat in the passenger seat, her hands gripping her thighs, her breathing uneven as she stared straight ahead. Callan didn't speak, didn't slow down. "We're almost there," he said once, his voice controlled, but tighter than usual. Alina nodded faintly. "Okay," but her voice didn't hold because the pain hadn't stopped. It came in waves now. Sharp, relentless. By the time they reached the hospital, everything blurred. Voices, movement, hands guiding her. She barely registered being placed onto the bed, the cold surface grounding her in a way nothing else could. "Can you describe the pain?" someone asked. Alina tried. It started suddenly, and then she stopped, her breath catching, because even explaining it felt like admitting something. Callan stood nearby, his presence steady, but his silence louder now. Doctors moved quickly, professional, focused. Time stretched. Seconds felt longer. Then it stopped. Not the pain, but something else. The movement, the urgency. The doctor's expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable, and Alina saw it. She didn't ask right away, didn't speak. She just watched. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said gently. That was it. That one sentence. Everything after that didn't matter. Alina stared ahead, her body still, her mind blank. "No," she said quietly, not loud, not emotional, just firm. The doctor hesitated. "Alina." "No," she repeated, shaking her head slightly now. "That's not, it was fine. I didn't." Her voice broke. She stopped, because the words didn't make sense anymore. Nothing did. Callan stepped forward slightly. "Alina." She didn't look at him, didn't respond, because, in that moment, everything inside her had gone silent. Not peaceful, empty. The kind of empty that doesn't make noise, but changes everything. And just like that, what had brought them closer was gone. The room didn't change, but everything inside it did. Alina lay still on the hospital bed, her hands resting beside her, fingers slightly curled like they didn't know what to hold on to anymore. The monitors were quiet. The movement had slowed. The urgency was gone. And that was the worst part. Because just moments ago, everything had felt active, alive, possible. Now, there was nothing left to fix. Alina's eyes stayed forward, unfocused, like she was looking through everything instead of at it. She didn't cry, not immediately, because the reality hadn't fully landed yet. She started softly, her voice barely there, then stopped. Her throat tightened, her chest rising slightly as she tried to breathe through something that didn't have shape yet. Callan stood beside her, his posture rigid, his hands at his sides, like he didn't know where to place them. For once, he had no direction, no plan. "What happened?" he asked, his voice lower now, controlled, but strained beneath it. The doctor answered gently, explaining something about complications, about things that couldn't have been predicted. But Alina didn't hear it. Not really. Because none of those words answered the only question that mattered. Why? Her gaze dropped slowly to her stomach. Empty. The word formed quietly in her mind. Her hand moved slightly, hesitant, then rested there again, like she was trying to reconnect with something that wasn't there anymore. "I felt it," she whispered. Callan's head turned toward her. I knew something was wrong. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. That made it worse, because it sounded like acceptance. Callan stepped closer this time, slower, unsure. "Alina." She turned her head slightly away, not sharply, not angrily, just enough, and that small movement created distance, not physical, but something deeper, something that hadn't been there before. The silence stretched, long, heavy, and neither of them knew how to fill it. If you've ever gone through a moment where everything just stopped and you didn't even know how to react, did you speak about it? Or did you carry it alone? Leaving the hospital didn't feel real. The world outside looked the same, moved the same, but Alina didn't feel part of it anymore. She walked beside Callan in silence, her steps steady but distant, like her body was moving on its own. The drive home passed without words. No music, no conversation, just the sound of the road beneath them. Callan glanced at her once, then again. "You should rest when we get back," he said. Alina nodded faintly. Okay, that was it. No emotion in it, no resistance, and somehow, that felt worse than if she had broken down, because this version of her was harder to reach. Back at the penthouse, everything was exactly where they had left it. Nothing out of place, nothing changed, and that felt wrong. Alina stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving across the room like she was seeing it differently now. The couch, the kitchen, the hallway, all of it the same, but not to her. She moved past everything without stopping, heading straight toward the bedroom. Callan watched her go. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it, because whatever he could say didn't feel enough. Inside the room, Alina sat at the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, her posture still. Callan stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in. "We can talk to the doctor again," he said. "Figure out what happened." Alina didn't look up. "Why?" she asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" She lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting his, not emotional, not angry, just tired. "It doesn't change anything." Silence. Callan didn't respond immediately, because she was right, and that truth didn't give him anything to work with. He stepped closer, carefully. "We'll try again," he said. There it was, a solution. Alina held his gaze for a second longer. Then, she nodded. "Okay, but this time," that word meant something different. Not hope, not belief, just agreement. And in that moment, Callan didn't realize it, but something between them had already shifted. Not broken, but no longer whole. Grief didn't bring them closer. It separated them, not loudly, not in arguments or accusations, but in silence, the kind that settles into a home and refuses to leave. Alina stopped asking how his day went, stopped waiting for him in the evenings, stopped trying to fill the space between them. And Callan? He noticed. Of course he did. But instead of stepping toward it, he stepped away. Work became easier, predictable, structured, something he could control. He stayed later, came home quieter, kept conversations short. One evening, he walked in to find Alina sitting at the dining table, her phone untouched in front of her, her posture straight, but distant. "You didn't eat?" he asked. She glanced up briefly. "I wasn't hungry." A pause. Callan nodded once. Okay, that was it. No follow-up, no insistence. And that small lack of effort, said more than anything else. Because, before, he would have stayed, asked again, tried. Now, he accepted distance. And Alina felt it, every time. Later that night, she stood by the window, her arms loosely folded as she stared out at the city lights. Callan moved behind her, stopping a few steps away, not too close, not too far. "You should get some rest," he said. Alina didn't turn. "I will," but neither of them moved, because the space between them had grown, and neither of them knew how to close it anymore. Callan exhaled quietly, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before he turned away. And that moment, that choice, was where everything started slipping, because instead of stepping into the discomfort, he avoided it. And avoidance creates distance faster than anything else. It didn't start dramatically. No sudden entrance, no confrontation, just a name. Callan's phone lit up one afternoon while he sat alone in his office, the screen reflecting softly against the glass desk. He glanced at it without thinking, then paused, his fingers stilled. Serena. The name sat there, familiar, unresolved. He didn't answer immediately, just stared at it, long enough for the call to stop. Silence returned, but it didn't feel the same. Callan leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair as he exhaled slowly. "Not now," he muttered. But even as he said it, something in him had already shifted. The phone lit up again. Another call. Same name. This time, he answered. Yeah, he said, his tone controlled, but lower than usual. A pause. His expression changed slightly, not obvious. But there, I told you this wasn't a good time, he continued. Another pause. Then, his posture shifted, more attentive now. Where are you? He asked. That question, it wasn't neutral. It meant something. Across the city, Serena Hale stood exactly where she had always belonged. Within the same world Callan understood without effort. When they met later that evening, nothing felt forced. No tension, no emotional weight, just familiarity. You look tired, Serena said, studying him carefully. Callan gave a faint nod. It's been a long few weeks. She didn't ask for details, didn't push. She simply understood. And that was the difference. Because with Alina, everything carried weight, emotion, history, pain. But with Serena, it was easy. No explanations, no vulnerability required. Just two people who already knew how to exist around each other. You disappeared, she said lightly, her tone calm, but observant. Callan exhaled quietly. Life got complicated. Serena tilted her head slightly. And now? A pause. Callan looked at her, and for the first time in a while, there was no hesitation. I needed a break. Serena didn't react strongly, didn't judge. She simply nodded. Then you came to the right place. And just like that, without effort, without resistance, she stepped back into his life, not as something new, but as something familiar, something easy. And that made her dangerous. It wasn't immediate, the shift, but it was clear. Callan didn't plan it, didn't sit down and decide anything. It just happened. With Serena, there was no wait, no conversations that lingered too long, no questions that required him to dig deeper than he was comfortable with, just ease. They met more than once, not excessively, not in ways that would draw attention, but enough. Enough for it to become familiar again. One evening, they sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant, the lighting soft, the atmosphere calm. Serena leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed, her expression composed. You always disappear when things get complicated, she said, her tone light, but observant. Callan gave a faint exhale. I don't disappear. She raised a brow slightly. No? A pause. He glanced down briefly, then back at her. I step away from things that don't make sense. Serena held his gaze, and then she nodded. Right, she said. No argument, no push, and that made it easier, because she didn't challenge him, didn't ask him to explain himself beyond what he was willing to say. She accepted what he gave, and in return, Callan relaxed. His shoulders weren't as tight, his tone wasn't as controlled. He didn't have to think before he spoke. With Alina, everything felt heavier, not because she demanded too much, but because she felt too deeply, because every conversation carried meaning, every silence had weight, and after everything they had just gone through, Callan didn't know how to sit in that kind of emotional space, so instead, he leaned into what felt easier. You look better, Serena said after a moment, watching him carefully. Callan frowned slightly. What do you mean? She tilted her head just a fraction. Less tense. A pause. He didn't answer right away, because part of him knew she was right. And that realization, it settled quietly, without resistance, because ease is comfortable, and comfort doesn't ask you to grow. Alina didn't need proof. She felt it, not in anything obvious, not in something she could point to directly, just a change. Callan came home later, spoke less, stayed distant, even when he was physically there. And the space between them, it grew again. One night, she stood in the kitchen, rinsing a glass slowly, her mind elsewhere as she listened to the quiet behind her. The door opened, closed. Callan walked in. You're still up, he said. Alina didn't turn right away. Yeah. A pause. He stepped further in, setting his keys down, loosening his cuff slightly. "How was your day?" he asked. The question sounded routine, almost automatic. Alina turned slightly, her eyes settling on him. It was fine. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but not connected either. She studied him for a second, longer than usual. "You've been busy," she said. Callan nodded once. "Work's been demanding." Alina held his gaze. "Is that all?" she asked. The question sat there, not accusing, not emotional, just direct. Callan's expression didn't shift much. "What do you mean?" Alina hesitated, just slightly. Then she shook her head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing, because she had felt it, that difference, that absence, and more than anything, she recognized it, because she had lived through it before, not with him, but enough to understand what it meant. When someone starts pulling away, they don't always leave all at once. They leave in pieces. And by the time you fully realize it, they're already gone. Later that night, Alina lay in bed, her back turned slightly, her eyes open as she listened to the quiet behind her. Callan entered the room, moved around, but didn't come close, didn't reach for her, didn't close the space. And that confirmed it. Alina closed her eyes slowly. "Okay," she whispered under her breath. But this time, that word carried something else, not acceptance, understanding. And understanding hurts more, because now, she wasn't guessing anymore. Something had changed, and whatever it wasn't in her favor. Alina didn't plan to follow him. She told herself she wouldn't, but something inside her wouldn't stay quiet anymore. It started small, a feeling, persistent. The late nights, the distance, the way Callan's attention no longer lingered on her at all. She didn't need proof, but she needed clarity. So when he left earlier than usual that evening, she waited. 5 minutes, 10, then she grabbed her keys. The drive felt controlled, too controlled, her hands steady on the wheel, her breathing measured, but her mind, it was already ahead. She knew where to go, because Serena had never been far from Callan's world. The building stood exactly as she remembered, elegant, quiet, untouched by anything chaotic. Alina stepped out slowly, her heels clicking softly against the ground as she walked toward the entrance. No hesitation now. The elevator ride was silent. Her reflection stared back at her. Calm, too calm. "Just see it," she whispered. The doors opened, and everything shifted. The door to Serena's apartment wasn't fully closed, just slightly open. Enough. Alina stopped just outside, her hand hovering near it, her breath steady, but heavier now. Voices, low, familiar. She pushed the door open, slowly, and then she saw them. Callan stood near the window. Close, too close. Serena stood in front of him, her body angled slightly toward his, her hand resting lightly against his chest. Not accidental, not casual, intentional. Callan's hand rested at her waist. Firm, unquestioning. The space between them? Gone. Alina's breath caught. Sharp. Neither of them noticed her immediately, because they were already inside something. Serena leaned in slightly, her voice low, almost teasing. "You always come back when things get complicated." Callan's expression shifted, not defensive, not resistant. "I didn't plan to," he replied, but he didn't move away. Serena's fingers traced lightly upward along his chest, slow, deliberate, and yet, here you are. A pause. Callan's hand tightened slightly at her waist. That was enough. Alina stepped forward, and everything stopped. They turned at the same time. Callan first, then Serena, and for a moment, no one spoke. The air shifted instantly. Alina stood there, her chest rising slightly, her eyes locked on them, not confused, not unsure, just seeing. Callan's hand dropped from Serena's waist. Too late. Because she had already seen it, Serena didn't move away immediately. She stayed where she was. Composed, her gaze moved over Alina calmly. Not dismissive, not apologetic. Just aware. And then, Slowly, her hand moved from her side to her stomach, resting there, soft, intentional. Alina's eyes followed the movement instantly, and that's when it hit. "No," she whispered. The word came out before she could stop it, because suddenly, everything made sense. The distance, the late nights, the emotional absence. Her gaze lifted back to Callan, searching, demanding. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," she said, her voice tighter now. Callan didn't answer immediately. That hesitation, it stretched. And Serena? She didn't interrupt, didn't explain. She just stood there, hands still resting over her stomach. A quiet claim. Alina shook her head slowly, her breathing uneven now as she took a step closer. "You're pregnant," she said. Not a question, a realization. Serena's expression softened slightly, but not with guilt, with certainty. "Yes," she said calmly. That word, it didn't just land, it shattered. Alina let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh, but didn't quite make it. "Wow," she murmured, her head shaking slightly. "Wow." Her eyes moved back to Callan, and this time, they didn't search, they demanded. "Say something." Silence. And that was worse than the truth, because it confirmed everything. Everything she had felt was real. "You went back to her." Alina's voice came out low at first, too controlled. Then it broke. "After I lost our baby?" The words ripped through the room, sharp, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. Callan flinched, just slightly, but he didn't step forward, didn't close the distance, and that was enough to make everything inside her snap. "I was in that hospital," she continued, her voice rising now, her hands shaking as she pointed at him. "I was lying there trying to understand how we lost everything. And you were here?" Her chest rose sharply, her breath uneven, as the emotion finally pushed through. "With her?" she added, her voice cracking. Silence. Callan ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening as he exhaled. "Alina." "No." She cut him off immediately, stepping forward now, her control slipping completely. "No, don't do that. Don't try to calm this down like it's something small." Her voice trembled, but it didn't weaken. "Say it," she demanded. "Say exactly what this is." Callan hesitated, just for a second, but that second, it felt like confirmation. Alina let out a short, disbelieving breath, shaking her head. "Wow," she whispered. "You really did this." Serena shifted slightly then, her posture still composed, her hand never leaving her stomach. "You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be," she said calmly. That was the wrong thing to say. Alina turned toward her instantly, her eyes sharp. "Don't," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air. "Don't talk to me like you have any place in this." Serena didn't react strongly, didn't raise her voice. "I'm already in it," she replied simply. A pause, heavy, because that wasn't arrogance. It was truth. Alina laughed. This time it came out, but it wasn't humor. "Oh, I see," she said, nodding slowly. "So, this is what we're doing now?" Her gaze shifted back to Callan. "You just replace me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, but more dangerous. "Just like that?" Callan's expression hardened slightly. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" She fired back immediately. "Explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you walked out of one life and straight into another." A pause. Callan's eyes flickered, conflict, tension, something unspoken, but he didn't deny it. And that was louder than anything he could have said. Alina stared at him, waiting, not for comfort, not for excuses, for truth. Was she always there? She asked, her voice dropping now. Quieter, steadier, but heavier than before. Callan didn't answer immediately. Serena's gaze shifted slightly toward him, but she didn't interrupt. The silence stretched, and Alina felt it, that same hesitation, that same distance. "Answer me," she said, her voice tightening. Callan exhaled slowly, his eyes locking onto hers, and then he said it. "I never stopped loving her." Everything stopped. No movement, no sound, just that sentence. hanging in the air. Alina blinked once, then again, like her mind was trying to catch up with what her ears had already heard. "What?" she whispered, but she had heard him. She just needed a second. Callan didn't take it back, didn't soften it, because there was nothing left to hide. Alina let out a slow breath, her chest tightening as she nodded faintly. "Okay," she said, but her voice didn't hold. She swallowed, her eyes glistening now, but the tears didn't fall, not yet. "So all this time," she continued, her voice uneven now, "everything we built, everything I gave you." Her lips trembled slightly. "You were still holding on to her?" Callan didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the answer was already there. Alina stepped back slowly, once, then again, creating distance, not just from him, from everything. "You don't get to keep me," she said finally, her voice steady again, but cold now. "Not like this." Callan's brows pulled together slightly. "Alina." "No," she cut him off, lifting her hand just enough to stop him. "You made your choice." A pause. Her eyes shifted briefly to Serena, then back to him, and now, "I'm making mine." Silence followed, heavy, final, because this time, there was no confusion, no doubt, just truth, and truth doesn't leave room for anything else. Alina didn't leave immediately. That's what made it different. She didn't storm out, didn't slam anything, didn't give them chaos to hold on to. She just stood there, still. Her breathing slowed first, then her hands, then her expression followed. The pain didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling her. Something else stepped in. Clarity. Callan watched her closely now, like he was trying to catch something before it slipped away. "Alina." He started. She lifted her hand slightly. "Don't." It wasn't loud, but it stopped him. For the first time, she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. She took a slow step back, her posture straightening, her presence shifting into something steadier, something untouchable. "I think," she said, her voice calm, "this is the first time I'm actually seeing everything clearly." A pause. Callan frowned. "Seeing what?" Alina let out a quiet breath. "You," she said, "not emotional, not broken, just true. You didn't change," she continued. "You just finally showed me who you've always been." Her eyes moved briefly to Serena, then back to him, and I ignored it. No blame, no anger, just accountability. Callan stepped forward slightly. "It's not that simple." She shook her head once. "No, it actually is." Her gaze held his, steady and unwavering. "You loved her," she said. "You never stopped. And instead of being honest about that, you built something with me anyway." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." She let out a small breath, almost like disbelief. "Fair?" she repeated softly. "You think this is about fair?" She stepped back again, creating space that felt permanent now. "I stood by you. I tried with you. I stayed, even when it felt like I was the only one fighting for us." A brief pause, and when it mattered the most, her voice softened. "You were already somewhere else." Silence. He didn't respond, because he couldn't. Alina swallowed lightly, grounding herself. "You don't get to love me halfway." That sentence landed clean. No shaking, no hesitation, just truth. Callan's expression shifted, but she didn't stop. "You don't get to come to me when it's hard, and run to her when it's easy." Serena stayed quiet, but even she felt that. "I deserved better than that," Alina finished. And this time, it wasn't doubt. It was certainty. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fix. Alina looked at him one last time, not with hope, not with pain, just understanding. And, strangely, that made it easier. She turned, no hesitation. Callan moved forward instinctively. "Alina, wait." She paused, just for a second, then she glanced back over her shoulder. "Barely. I hope she gives you everything you couldn't give me," she said quietly. No anger, no bitterness, just truth. Then she walked away, The door closed behind her, soft, final, and just like that, she was gone. Not broken, not waiting, not looking back. She left with something stronger than love, self-worth. And in that silence she left behind. That absence said everything, because this time, she didn't lose him. She chose herself. Callan didn't go after Alina, not immediately. He stood there, still. The door had already closed, but the weight of it stayed. Serena moved first, slow, calm, like nothing had just collapsed in front of them. "You should sit," she said, her voice soft, controlled. Callan didn't respond. His mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was replaying everything, Alina's words, her tone, her certainty. "You don't get to love me halfway." That line stayed. Callan exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face as he finally moved, stepping away from Serena this time, creating space. That shift didn't go unnoticed. Serena's gaze followed him carefully. "Don't start doing that," she said. Callan paused. "What?" "That thing where you shut down after things get complicated." He turned slightly, his expression tighter now. "This isn't about that." Serena held his gaze. Then, she stepped closer. "It doesn't have to be this heavy," she said gently. But Callan didn't relax, because something small, had just started to bother him. "How far along are you?" he asked suddenly. The question landed differently. Serena stilled, just slightly. "What?" she replied. Callan's eyes narrowed, not aggressively, but thoughtfully. "How far along?" he repeated. A pause. Serena let out a small breath. "A few weeks," she said. Callan nodded once, but his expression didn't settle, because his mind was already calculating. Weeks. He thought back to when he had seen her again, to when things restarted, to how recent it all actually was. Something didn't align. "That doesn't make sense," he said quietly. Serena's posture shifted slightly. "What do you mean?" Callan's gaze stayed on her now, focused. "We only started seeing each other again recently." Silence. And this time, it wasn't empty. It was loaded. Serena didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, carefully. Then, she tilted her head slightly. "You're overthinking this." Callan didn't react to that, because he wasn't overthinking. He was remembering every detail, every timeline, every moment. "No," he said slowly. "I'm not." A pause. Serena crossed her arms lightly. "Not defensive, but controlled. These things don't always follow exact timelines," she replied. "You know that." Callan's jaw tightened slightly. "I also know basic math," he said. That landed, because now, there was no softness in his tone, just logic. Serena held his gaze, then looked away briefly. That small movement, it said more than anything else. Callan noticed. Of course he did. "Serena," he said, quieter now, but sharper. She looked back at him, and for the first time, there was something different in her expression. Not fear, but calculation. "Why are you doing this right now?" she asked softly. Callan didn't move, didn't soften, because something isn't adding up. Silence. And that silence? It stretched longer this time, because now, the certainty that had once filled the room was gone, replaced with doubt. Callan stepped back slowly, his mind working through everything again, but this time with a different lens, not emotional, analytical. "You said a few weeks," he continued, "but that doesn't line up with when we—" He stopped. His expression shifted, because now, it wasn't just confusion, it was realization. Serena watched him carefully, too carefully. "You're thinking too much into this," she said again, but her voice didn't carry the same certainty anymore. Callan shook his head once, slow. "No," he said, and this time, he was sure, something wasn't right. Not the timing, not the situation, not the way everything had unfolded so quickly. He looked at her again, really looked this time, and suddenly, she didn't feel familiar anymore. She felt unclear. "Is it mine?" he asked. The question cut through everything. direct, unavoidable. Serena didn't answer. And that was the loudest response of all, because now, the story had changed. Completely. And the truth? It wasn't what it seemed. Callan didn't stay long after that. The room didn't feel the same anymore. Not after the question, not after the silence that followed it. Serena said something. He didn't fully hear it, because his mind had already left. By the time he stepped outside, the night air hit differently. Colder, sharper. He stood there for a moment, his hands resting at his sides, his chest rising slowly as he tried to settle something that wouldn't settle. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. But deep down, it did. Everything made sense now, just not in the way he wanted. Alina's face came back first, not the anger, not the confrontation, the calm, the way she looked at him when she said it. "You don't get to love me halfway." Callan exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening as he ran a hand through his hair, because now, he understood it, not as something emotional, not as something exaggerated, but as truth. She had been there, fully, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when she wasn't sure where she stood. And him? He had been divided. 1 foot in something real, 1 foot in something familiar, and in the end, he chose what was easier. Callan looked up, his gaze distant now. "I lost her," he said quietly. And that realization, it didn't hit all at once. It settled, slow, heavy, because this wasn't just about a mistake. It was about a pattern, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. The penthouse felt different when he walked in. Too quiet, not the usual silence. This one had weight. Callan stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the space like something should still be there. But it wasn't. Alina's presence. Gone. Not physically, but emotionally. And that absence? It was loud. He loosened his cuff absent-mindedly, his movement slower now, less precise than usual. His gaze landed on the kitchen, a memory. Her standing there, calm, soft, trying. "You ate?" he had asked once, and she had smiled, just slightly. Callan closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't see it," he admitted under his breath, because he hadn't, not fully. He had seen her effort, her patience, her consistency, but he hadn't valued it, not the way it deserved. He walked further in, stopping near the living room, his eyes drifting toward the space where she used to sit. Another memory, her on the floor, wineglass untouched, saying, "I don't always know where I stand with you." Callan swallowed slightly, his throat tightening. "You were right," he said quietly, but she wasn't there to hear it. And that was the worst part, because realization, without the chance to fix it, that's regret. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant and impossible to undo. He picked up his phone, scrolled, stopped, Alina's name. His thumb hovered over it. A pause. Then he called. It rang. Once, twice. Then, voicemail. Callan closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose as he pulled the phone away. "Yeah," he murmured. "That makes sense." He didn't call again, because something inside him already knew she wasn't coming back. Not this time. Not after finally choosing herself. He lowered himself onto the couch slowly, his posture no longer controlled, just heavy. And for the first time, Callan felt it fully. Not confusion, not conflict. Loss, real loss. Not of convenience, not of comfort, but of something rare, something he didn't recognize until it was gone. "I had her," he said quietly, "and I let her go." Silence filled the room, and this time, there was no distraction, no escape, just truth. Before we end this story, I want to ask you something. Be real with me. Have you ever realized someone's value only after they were gone? Or have you ever been the one who walked away because you knew staying meant losing yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if this story hit you, even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Miss Wink Stories. Because sometimes, the stories we watch, are the ones we've lived. And the hardest lesson? Sometimes you don't lose the right person. You realize, too late, that you were the one who let them go. Weeks passed, not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily. Alina didn't rush healing. She didn't pretend everything was fine. She simply moved forward. Her new space was smaller, quieter, but it felt different, lighter. She stood by the window one morning, sunlight resting gently across her skin, a warm cup in her hand as she looked out at a city that hadn't changed. But there was no tension in her shoulders anymore, no constant overthinking, no silent questioning of where she stood. Just peace, not perfect, but real. Her phone buzzed softly on the table behind her. She glanced at it, paused, then turned away, because not every call deserved an answer anymore. She had learned that the hard way. Later that day, she met with a friend, laughter coming easier now, not forced, not used as a distraction, genuine. And in those moments, she realized something quietly. She hadn't lost everything. She had lost what was breaking her, and gained something stronger, herself. "I'm okay," she said softly, almost to herself. And this time, it was true. Callan's world didn't fall apart. Not on the surface. Business continued. Meetings happened. Life moved forward. But internally, everything felt different. Serena was still there, but the ease that once defined them was gone. Now there were questions, gaps, unspoken tension that didn't fade. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way she avoided certain conversations, the way her answers didn't always align. And once doubt enters, it doesn't leave quietly. One evening he sat across from her, his posture composed, but his eyes sharper now. "We should clarify something," he said. Serena looked at him, calm, but not as steady as before. "What exactly are we doing?" he asked. A pause, because now, this wasn't familiarity, it was uncertainty. And for the first time, Callan didn't feel grounded in her presence. He felt unsure, which forced him to confront something deeper. He hadn't just lost Alina. He had traded something real for something that only felt easy. And now, even that ease was gone. Callan leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly as realizations settled deeper. "I made the wrong choice," he admitted. But there was no one there to correct it, no one to fix it, no one to go back to, because the one person who would have stayed had already walked away. Across the city, Alina walked past a storefront, catching her reflection briefly in the glass. She paused, not out of doubt, but recognition of who she had become, stronger, clearer, unshaken. And for the first time, she didn't question her worth. She knew it. She gave a small nod to herself, then kept walking, no looking back. Because some chapters aren't meant to be revisited. They're meant to be learned from, and maybe that's the real truth in all of this. If someone only chooses you after losing you, were you ever truly loved? Think about that. Now I want to hear from you. Be honest. Should Alina ever forgive him? Or is walking away the only real form of self-respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, reflect, or even question your own experiences, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Miss Wink Stories, because sometimes the stories we watch are mirrors, and sometimes they teach us exactly when it's time to walk away.